Deep Leaf Audio presents Illuminatus, Part 3, Leviathan, by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson. A multi-voice recording.
The mutation from terrestrial to interstellar life must be made, because the womb planet itself is going to blow up within a few billion years. Planet Earth is a stepping stone on our time trip through the galaxy. Life has to get its seed self off the planet to survive. There are also some among us who are bored with the amniotic level of mentation on this planet and look up in hopes of finding someone entertaining to talk to. Timothy Leary, Ph.D., and L. Wayne Brenner, Terra 2.
Prologue. If you'd go out and buy volumes 1 and 2, you wouldn't have to listen to this synopsis. Long shot of a gigantic shadow falling across a map of the United States. A tiny hand rises and pins a flag on Chicago. Camera pans back, and we see Markov Cheney, a midget with an incredibly malignant smile. He chuckles. Mr. Cheney, in fact, is carrying on a one-man war against the standardization. He is very substandard. And mechanization, he is very alive, of modern society. It is he who has rewired the traffic signals in all large cities so that the walk sign flashes on red and don't walk on green. He who, infiltrating printing plants, set the instructions on tax forms. He who decorates business places with idiotic instructions signed the MGT, i.e. the midget, but most people think that the abbreviation means the management, and dutifully obey. The midget versus the digits is his mahamantram. I'll get them before they get me, he cackles. On the side, Markov is writing a book proving that all culture and science was created by men under 5 feet tall. Little men with big balls, he calls it. But you can be sure that when it is finally published, the publisher will have changed the title to Little Men with Big Ideas. If you ever see the graffito stamp out sizeism, you can be sure Cheney has been there before you. Alas, unknown to himself, the very small Cheney has become a very large monkey wrench in the plans of the Illuminati, a secret society seemingly dedicated to rationality, science, law and order, and total control of everybody. Not being able to trace the activities of the elusive midget, however, the Illuminati attribute his surrealist insurrectionary activities to ELF, the Eurasian Liberation Front, another vast conspiracy headed by the Dalai Lama, an old mystic who lives in the sewers below Dealey Plaza, Dallas, and seemingly plots irrationality, mysticism, anarchy, and total liberation of everybody. Cut. Tight close-up of Joe Malick as he tells us about his own involvement. I put out Confrontation magazine, you know, the last of the red-hot liberals. He shrugs ambiguously, Arab-American intellectual out of his depth, feeling as archaic as the Underground Railroad. It, all began at the Democratic Convention of 1968 when I, lost faith in liberalism and joined the Jams. Simon Moon recruited me. Simon enters the frame, all wild hair and curly black beard, eyes aglow with LSD visions. Tim Moon was my father, and he taught me to sing Joe Hill and Union Maid before I knew the alphabet. I knew Wobbly headquarters in Chicago before I saw a classroom. When I got my master's in math from Antioch, I could have gone to work for any corporation in the country. But 10,000 dead Wobbs rose from their graves singing, "Which side are you on?" And I decided it was more honorable to make my living selling weed. Simon, in fact, is a marijuana dealer only by profession. By avocation, he is a fanatic member of the Jams, Justified Ancients of Mumu, a secret society which has endured since Babylon and worships Mumu, goddess of chaos. The Jams are now in the 59th century of the war against the Illuminati. Before joining the Jams, Joe Malick says, the only people I ever heard talk about the Illuminati conspiracy were right-wing cranks. I was sure Simon was putting me on at first, but then I met the leader of the Jams. Thunder on the soundtrack. Eerie shadows cross Joe's face. We are standing outside a bungalow in Los Angeles. Simon knocks, and Joe looks nervous. The door opens and a feisty old man says, So you're the new recruit. Come in and tell me how a goddamn intellectual can help us beat the shit out of the cocksucking Illuminati motherfuckers. This little old gentleman has a peculiarly mocking and stony glitter in his eyes. And why not? He is John Dillinger, now living under the name Frank Sullivan, and president of Laughing Phallus Productions, king of the rock music industry. Flashback to 1923. Dillinger unsteadily holds a gun on grocer B.F. Morgan, who is giving the Masonic signal of distress. John makes a deal with the DA, but lands in prison for 9 years anyway. Sure that the Masons are behind this betrayal, although older cons tell him, never trust a DA's deal, or an automatic pistol. John joins the Jams and subsequently uses their motto, lie down on the floor and keep calm, during each of his bank heists. This is his way of taunting J. Edgar Hoover, a 33rd degree Mason and high Illuminatus Primus. Hoover in turn recognizes John as a Jam revolutionary and gives shoot-on-sight orders that result in the massacre of 3 businessmen who are mistaken for the Dillinger gang at Little Bohemia Lodge in Wisconsin. Smarting from criticism after this embarrassing incident, the FBI subsequently keeps quiet when the man they shoot at the Biograph Theater, July 22, 1934, also turns out to be an innocent bystander. Dillinger is promoted to a higher rank in the Jams and abandons such crude tactics as knocking over banks. Now, in the mid-1970s, an old man, Dillinger has decided to amalgamate the Jams with still another secret society, the Legion of Dynamic Discord, headed by the enigmatic Hagbard Co, engineer, lawyer, mystic, and owner-designer of Fuck-Up, first universal, cybernetic, kinetic, uniprogrammer, the world's smartest computer. Simon Moon. Hagbard's a right-wing crank. Joe Malick. I don't know. Hagbard's a genius, that's for sure. Unfortunately, his IQ is mostly devoted to keeping the world confused about his real motives. I just don't know. Hagbard, in fact, fancies himself a sociologist and has created the snafu principle, which holds that communication is possible only between equals. All hierarchical organizations in which people function as non-equals are therefore in perpetual communication jam, he asserts. The paradigm is the army, where the phrase snafu, situation normal or fucked up, indeed originated. But every hierarchy has the same jam-up Hagbard holds, and this includes corporations, governments, and every other variety of unequal social construct. According to this theory, Hagbard cheerfully announces, the Illuminati plot to create law and order must always lead to greater and greater chaos. Where the Jams worship Mumu, Babylonian goddess of chaos, Hagbard's Legion of Dynamic Discord honors Eris, Greek goddess of confusion. Unbeknown to the Jams, Hagbard is also allied with the Erisian Liberation Front, ELF, in its program of Operation Mindfuck, OM, a project to overthrow authority by spreading confusion and uncertainty everywhere. Even Hagbard, however, does not realize that the tiny Markov Cheney is serving that cause better than all these conspiracies. Close-up of Fuck-Up, Hagbard's genius computer as it throws an internal I Ching reading, scanning open circuits as yin lines, closed circuits as yang. These are correlated with current astronomical astrological parameters, CBS News, facts on file, and reports from Hagbard's agents in world capitals. Fuck-Up summarizes. World War III is imminent. Prognosis, many megadeaths. No blame. My ass, no blame, Hagbard rages. He now realizes the true importance of the Fernando Poo incident. Fernando Poo is a tiny island in the Bay of Biafra off the coast of Africa, where Captain Ernesto Tequila Imota has arranged his own promotion to Generalissimo by staging a coup d'etat. Crack CIA agents quickly report to Washington that the new regime is under the control of Russia and China. Top Soviet agents report to Moscow that it is controlled by China. Chinese intelligence pronounces it is under Moscow domination. As the 3 gigantic empires quarrel with one another under this mutual misapprehension, Hagbard, recognizing the fine hand of the Illuminati, reprograms Fuck-Up to locate the source of the real threat. Fernando Poo is, of course, only a smokescreen. The computer warns that Las Vegas needs watching. Sherry Brandy gives us her version. In this hard-ass town, the only way to make the scratch is to sell your snatch, sister. So I work for Carmel, who isn't bad as pimps go, if you don't mind getting beat all black and blue every so often. But now Carmel thinks we can get rich. Carmel is convinced that Sherry's new John, Charlie Mocenigo, who obviously works at a secret government installation in the desert, has discovered the ultimate secret weapon. Oddly, Carmel is right. The weapon is anthrax leprosy pie, ALP, a virus of omnivorous appetite. Carmel's plan to steal the formula and sell it to the first communist he can find in Las Vegas backfires, and Sherry and Mocenigo are both killed by an accidental infection. Carmel, also unknowingly infected, becomes a kind of typhoid Mary. Meanwhile, acting on a tip from Hagbard, Joe Malik sends Confrontation's ace reporter George Dorn to Mad Dog, Texas to investigate right-wing groups there rumored to be behind the assassinations of John and Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, George Lincoln Rockwell, and Spyro Agnew. In Mad Dog, George is busted for possession of marijuana and locked in jail by Sheriff Jim Cartwright. George's cellmate, a snaky-looking individual named Harry Coyne, first boasts about killing various famous people, then attempts to rape George. The jail is then invaded by a mysterious group led by Mavis, a young lady with a Tommy gun, and they remove George by way of a secret temple with a pyramid-shaped altar bearing the slogan Ewiger Blumenkraft. Mavis tells George that Mad Dog Jail is the secret chapel of the Illuminati. George is driven to the Gulf of Mexico, where he and Mavis quarrel about politics and enjoy some oral sex until the Leif Erikson appears. This is a gigantic golden submarine owned by Hagbard Chelene. George is whisked off with Hagbard to the ruins of Atlantis. Back in New York, Saul Goodman, inspector on the homicide squad, investigates the bombing of Confrontation, the mysterious disappearance of editor Joe Malik, and the even more mysterious disappearance of all of Malik's dogs. Danny Pricefixer, a young detective, finds a series of memos to Joe Malik from a researcher, and Saul reads them. They allege that 1. According to French sociologist Jacques Ellul, the Illuminati were founded in the 11th century and were a Christian communist heresy dedicated to redistributing the wealth. 2. According to Durrell's History of Secret Societies, the Illuminati were based on two medieval Arabian secret societies, the Roshinaya and the Assassins. 3. According to the Encyclopaedia Britannica, the Illuminati were founded by Professor Adam Weishaupt in Ingolstadt, Bavaria in 1776 and destroyed by the government in 1786. 4. According to a letter in Playboy, the Illuminati still exist and masterminded the assassinations of recent years. 5. According to Teen Set magazine, the Illuminati control the rock music business. 6. According to American Opinion magazine, the Council on Foreign Relations, which has included virtually all recent presidents and secretaries of state in its membership, is an Illuminati front. 7. According to The Spark, a Chicago newspaper, Mayor Richard Daley used the Illuminati slogan Ewiger Blumenkraft during his diatribe at the 1968 Democratic Convention. Furthermore, George Washington was actually Adam Weishaupt in disguise. 8. According to CBS Radio News release, portraits of Washington appear to depict several different men. 9. According to the East Village Other, New York, the known leaders of the Illuminati in 1969 were Malaclips the Younger, Mao Zedong, Mordecai the Foul, Richard Nixon, the Aga Khan, Saint Yossarian, Nelson Rockefeller, Saint McMurphy, Lord Omar, and Mark Lane. This one, Saul decides thoughtfully, must be a hoax. 10. According to flying sources in the Bible, the Ion Pyramid Illuminati symbol was given to Jefferson by a man in a black cloak. 11. According to The Planet, San Francisco, the Ion Pyramid was the symbol of Dr. Timothy Leary during his campaign for governor. 12. According to proofs of a conspiracy by 19th century Freemason John Robeson, the Illuminati controlled European Masonic lodges, but not the English lodges. 13. According to World Revolution by Nestor Webster, the Illuminati inspire and finance all socialist and communist revolutions. 14. According to History of Magic by Eliphas Levi, the Illuminati are black magicians. 15. According to High IQ Bulletin, the Illuminati are invaders from Venus. 16. According to Libertarian American, the Illuminati taught black magic and psychopolitics to Adolf Hitler and J. Edgar Hoover. 17. According to the Los Angeles Free Press, the Illuminati are thought to control the Theosophical Society through California right-wingers. Barney Muldoon of the bomb squad meanwhile uncovers evidence that the Illuminati are actually Jesuits. Comparing notes, Goodman and Muldoon emerge with the tentative theory that the Illuminati are Satanists and have infiltrated virtually every organization from the Catholic Church to Freemasonry. Unfortunately, Saul next finds himself in a mental hospital, where the staff assures him he is Barney Muldoon, suffering from the hallucination that he is Saul Goodman. Hagbard Co, meanwhile, is rushing towards sunken Atlantis to seize some long-buried artworks before the Illuminati spider ships get them. On the way, George Dawn is initiated into the Legion of Dynamic Discord by Stella, a lovely black lady. "When can I be initiated again?" he asks immediately. "Soon," Stella says lewdly. In the battle between the Leif Erikson and the spider ships, Hagbard is aided by a dolphin named Howard, leader of the AA, Atlantean Adepts, a Delphine secret society. Lots of conspiracies on this planet, George decides. George is next sent to the Blue Point, Long Island home of Boston banker Robert Putney Drake, richest man in the world and secret governor of the Mafia and other crime syndicates. In exchange for the Atlantean statues, Drake switches his allegiance from the Illuminati to the Legion of Dynamic Discord. Flashback. Drake in 1918, Chateau Thierry, the last wounded survivor of a dead platoon, weeping among the corpses. "Dear Jesus, let me live, let me live." Drake in 1936 Zurich, mescaline tripping with the Eastern Brotherhood, investigating Aleister Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis, seeking the Illuminati. Carl Jung musing on Drake, 1936. He doesn't want to murder his father and possess his mother. He wants to murder God and possess the universe. Arthur Flegenheimer, Dutch Schultz, dying in a Newark hospital, October 23, 1934, raving in delirium. "A boy has never wept nor dashed 1,000 kim. French-Canadian bean soup. The bears are in trouble, and the sidewalks are in trouble." Drake studying Schultz's last words under hashish, gradually reading the secret of the Illuminati control over organized crime. Present time again. George Dawn, after the deal with Drake, is being entertained in his bedroom by Tarantella Serpentine, the lady who taught Linda Lovelace everything. George is very entertained indeed. But later, waking suddenly, he finds the house under attack by a gigantic sea monster. With Drake's help, George escapes in a silver Wraith Rolls-Royce. Drake, with a strange grin. "We deserve to die." He is quoting the last scene of Bride of Frankenstein, but George doesn't know that.
The Ninth Trip, or Yesod. Walpurgis Nacht Rock.
Sync is played by Discordians and people of much ilk. Purpose? To sync object or an object or a thing in water or mud or anything you can sink something in. Rules. Sinking is allowed in any manner. To date, 10-pound chunks of mud have been used to sink a tobacco can. It is preferable to have a pit of water or a hole to drop things into, but rivers, bays, gulfs, I dare say even oceans can be used. Turns are taken thusly. Whosoever gets the junk up and in the air first. Duty. It shall be the duty of all persons playing sink to help find more objects to sink, once one object is sunk. Upon sinking, the sinker shall yell, "I sank it," or something equally as thoughtful. Naming of objects is sometimes desirable. The object is named by the finder of such object, and whosoever sinks it can say, for instance, "I sank Columbus, Ohio." Alahera, E.L., N.S., Rayville Apple Panthers, quoted in Principia Discordia by Malaclips the Younger, KSC.
For over a week, the musicians had been boarding planes and heading for Ingolstadt. As early as April 23rd, while Simon and Mary Lou listened to Clark Kent and his Superman, and George Dorn wrote about the sound of one eye opening, the Filet of Soul, finding bookings sparse in London, drove into Ingolstadt in a Volvo painted 17 day-glow colors and flaunting Ken Kesey's old slogan, Further. On April 24th, a real trickle began, and while Harry Coyne looked into Hagbard Cheleen's eyes and saw no mercy there, Buckminster Fuller just then was explaining omnidirectional halo to his seatmate on a TWA Whisperjet in mid-Pacific. The wrathful visions, the cockroaches, and the Senate and the people of Rome all drove down Rathausplatz in bizarre vehicles, while the ultraviolet hippopotamus and the thing on the doorstep both navigated Friedrich Ebertstrasse in even more amazing buses. On April 25th, while Carmel looted Maldonado's safe and George Dorn repeated, "I am the robot," the trickle turned into a stream, and in came Science and Health, with Key to the Scriptures, the Glue Sniffers, King Kong and his Skull Island dinosaurs, the Howard Johnson hamburger, the riot in Cell Block 10, the House of Frankenstein, the signifying monkey, the damn thing, the orange moose, the indigo banana, and the pink elephant. On April 26th, the stream became a flood, and while Saul and Barney Muldoon tried to reason with Markov Cheney and he struggled in their grip, Ingolstadters found themselves inundated by Frodo Baggins and his ring, the mouse that roars, the crew of the Flying Saucer, the Magnificent Ambersons, the house I live in, the sound of one hand, the territorial imperative, the druids of Stonehenge, the heads of Easter Island, the lost continent of Mu, Bugs Bunny and his 14 carrots, the gospel according to Marx, the card-carrying members, the sands of Mars, the erection, the association, the amalgamation, the St. Valentine's Day massacre, the climax, the broad jumpers, the pubic hairs, the freaks, and the windows. Mick Jagger and his new group, the Trashers, arrived on April 27th, while the FBI was interviewing every whore in Las Vegas, and there quickly followed the Roofs, Moses and monotheism, Steppenwolf, Civilization and its discontents, Poor Richard and his Rosicrucian secrets, the Wristwatch, the Nova Express, the Father of Waters, the Human Beings, the Washington Monument, the Thalidomide Babies, the Strangers in a Strange Land, Dr. John the Night Tripper, Joan Baez, the Dead Man's Hand, Joker and the One-Eyed Jacks, Peyote Woman, the Heavenly Blues, the Golems, the Supreme Awakening, the 7 Types of Ambiguity, the Cold War, the Street Fighters, the Bank Burners, the Slaves of Satan, the Domino Theory, and Maxwell and his Demons. On April 28th, while Dillinger loaded his gun and the Kachinas of Arabi began the drum beating, the Acapulco Gold Diggers arrived, followed by the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Second Law of Thermodynamics, Dracula and his Brides, the Iron Curtain, the Noisy Minority, the International Debt, 3 Contributions to the Theory of Sex, the Cloud of Unknowing, the Birth of a Nation, the Zombies, Attila and his Huns, Nihilism, the Catatonics, the Thorndale Jagoffs, the Haymarket Bomb, the Head of a Dead Cat, the Shadow Out of Time, the Sirens of Titan, the Piano Player, the Streets of Laredo, the Space Odyssey, the Blue Moonies, the Crabs, the Dose, the Grassy Knoll, the Latent Image, the Wheel of Karma, the Communion of Saints, the City of God, General Indefinite Wobble, the Left-Handed Monkey Wrench, the Thorn in the Flesh, the Rising Podge, Shazam, the Miniature Sled, the 23rd Appendix, the Other Cheek, the Occidental Ox, Miz and the Chairperson, Cohen, and Khan, and the Joint Phenomenon. On April 29th, while Danny Pricefixer listened raptly to Mama Sutra, the deluge descended upon Ingolstadt. Buses, trucks, station wagons, special trains, and every matter of transport except dog sleds brought in the wonders of the invisible world, Maul's curse, the Jesus head trip, Ahab and his amputation, the horseless headsman, the leaves of grass, the Gettysburg Address, the rosy-fingered dawn, the wine-dark sea, Nirvana, the net of jewels, Here Comes Everybody, the Pison Cantos, the snows of yesteryear, The Pink Dimension, The Goose in the Bottle, The Incredible Hulk, The Third Bardo, Aversion Therapy, The Irresistible Force, MC Squared, The Enclosure Acts, Perpetual Emotion, The 99-Year Lease, The Immovable Object, Spaceship Earth, The Radiocarbon Method, The Rebel Yell, The Clenched Fist, The Doomsday Machine, The Rand Scenario, The United States Commitment, The Entwives, The Players of Null A, The Prelude to Space, Thunder and Roses, Armageddon, The Time Machine, The Mason Word, The Monkey Business, The Works, The Eight of Swords, Guerrilla Warfare, The Box Lunch, The Primate Kingdom, The New Aeon, The Enola Gay, The Octet Truss, The Stochastic Process, The Fluxions, The Burning House, The Phantom Captain, The Decline of the West, The Duelists, The Call of the Wild, Consciousness 3, The Reorganized Church of the Latter-day Saints, Standard Oil of Ohio, The Zigzag Men, The Rubble Risers, The Children of Ra, TNT, Acceptable Radiation, The Pollution Level, The Great Beast, The Horrors of Babylon, The Wasteland, The Ugly Truth, The Final Diagnosis, Solution Unsatisfactory, The Heat Death of the Universe, Mere Noise, Eye-Opening, The 9 Unknown Men, The Horse of Another Color, The Falling Rock Zone, The Ascent of the Serpent, Ready, Willing, and Unable, The Civic Monster, Hercules and the Tortoise, The Middle Pillar, The Deleted Expletive, Deep Quote, Lucifer, The Dog Star, Nothing Serious, and Preparation H. But on April 23rd, while Joe Malik and Tobias Knight were setting the bomb in Confrontation's office, the Dalai Lama broadcast a telepathic message to Hagbard Chelene saying,
"It's not too late to turn back."
And Joe hesitated a moment, blurting finally,
"Can we be sure? Can we be really sure?"
Tobias Knight raised weary eyes.
"We can't be sure of anything,"
he said simply.
"Chelene has popped up at banquets and other social occasions where Drake was present 5 times now, and each conversation eventually got around to the puppet metaphor and Chelene's favorite bit about the unconscious saboteur in everybody. What else can we assume?"
He set the timer for 2:30 a.m. and then met Joe's eyes again.
"I wish I could have given George a few more hints,"
Joe said lamely.
"You gave him too damn many hints as it is,"
Knight replied, closing the bomb casing. On April 1st, while God's lightning paraded about UN Plaza and Captain Tequila E. Mota was led before a firing squad, John Dillinger arose from his cramped lotus position and stopped broadcasting the mathematics of magic. He stretched, shook all over like a dog, and proceeded down the tunnel under the UN building to Alligator Control. OTO yoga was always a strain, and he was glad to abandon it and return to more mundane matters. A guard stopped him at the AC door, and John handed over his plastic eye and pyramid card. The guard, a surly-looking woman, whose picture John had seen in the newspapers as a leader of the radical lesbians, fed the card into a wall slot. It came out again, almost at once, and a green light flashed.
"Pass,"
she said.
"Heute die Welt."
"Morgens das Sonnensystem,"
John replied. He entered the beige plastic underworld of Alligator Control and walked through geodesic corridors until he came to the door marked Monotony Monitor. After he inserted his card in the appropriate slot, another green light blinked and the door opened. Taffy Reingold, wearing a mini-skirt and still pert and attractive despite her years and gray hair, looked up from her typing. She sat behind a beige plastic desk that matched the beige plastic of the entire Alligator Control headquarters. A broad smile spread across her face when she recognized him.
"John,"
she said happily.
"What brings you here?"
"Gotta see your boss,"
he answered.
"But before you buzz him, do you know you're in another book?"
"The new Edison Yerby novel?"
She shrugged philosophically.
"Not quite as bad as what Atlanta Hope did to me and Telemachus sneezed."
"Yeah, I suppose. But how did this guy find out so much? Some of those scenes are absolutely true. Is he in the order?"
John demanded.
"A mind leak,"
Taffy said.
You know how it is with writers. One of the Illuminati magi scanned Yerby, and he thought he had invented all of it. Not a clue. The same kind of leak we had when Condon wrote The Manchurian Candidate.
She shrugged.
It just happens sometimes.
I suppose.
John said absently.
Well, tell your boss I'm here.
In a minute, he was in the inner office, being effusively greeted by the old man in the wheelchair.
John, it's so good to see you again,
said the crooning voice that had hypnotized millions. Otherwise, it was hard in this aged figure to recognize the once handsome and dynamic Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
How did you get stuck with a job like this?
Dillinger asked finally, after the amenities had been exchanged.
You know how it is with the new gang in Agharti,
Roosevelt murmured.
New blood, that's their battle cry. All of us old and faithful servants are being pushed into minor bureaucratic positions.
I remember your funeral,
John said wistfully.
I was envious, thinking of you going to Agharti and working directly with the Five. And now it's come to this. Monotony monitor in alligator control. Sometimes I get pissed with the order.
Careful,
Roosevelt said.
They might be scanning. And a double agent such as you are, John, is always under special surveillance. Besides, this isn't really so bad, considering how they reacted in Agharti when the Pearl Harbor revelations started coming out in the late 40s. I did not handle that matter too elegantly, you know, and they had a right to demote me. And alligator control is interesting.
Maybe,
John said dubiously.
I never have understood this project.
It's very significant work,
Roosevelt said seriously.
New York and Chicago are our major experiments in testing the Mehume tolerance level. In Chicago we concentrate on mere ugliness and brutality, but in New York we're simultaneously carrying on a long-range boredom study. That's where alligator control comes in. We've got to keep the alligators in the sewers down to a minimum, so the Bureau of Sanitation doesn't reactivate their own alligator control project, which would be an opportunity for adventure and a certain natural Mehume hunting band mystique among some of the young males. It's the same reason we took out the trolley cars. Riding them was more fun than buses. Believe me, monotony monitoring is a very important part of the New York project.
I've seen the mental health figures,
John said, nodding.
About 70% of the people in the most congested part of Manhattan are already pre-psychotic.
We'll have it up to 80% by 1980,
Roosevelt cried, with some of his old steely-eyed determination. But then he fixed a joint in his ivory holder and, clenching it at his famous jaunty angle, added,
And we're immune, thanks to Sabar's elixir.
He quoted cheerfully.
Grass does more than Milltown can to justify God's ways to man. But what does bring you here, John?
A small job,
Dillinger said.
There's a man in my organization named Malik who's getting a little too close to the secret of the whole game. I need some help here in New York to set him off on a snark hunt until after May 1st. I'd like to know who you've got in your staff closest to him.
Malik,
Roosevelt said thoughtfully.
That would be the Malik of Confrontation magazine?
John nodded, and Roosevelt sat back in his wheelchair, smiling.
This is a lead pipe cinch. We've got an agent in his office.
But neither of them realized that 10 days later, a dolphin swimming through the ruins of Atlantis would discover that no dragon star had ever fallen. Nor could they have guessed how Hagbard Co would reevaluate Illuminati history when that revelation was reported to him, and they had no clue of the decision he would then make, which would change everybody's conspiracies shockingly and unexpectedly.
Here are the 5 alternate histories,
Gruad said, his wise old eyes crinkling humorously.
Each of you will be responsible for planting the evidence to make one of these histories seem fairly credible. Wotopod, you get the Carcosa story. Evo, you get the lost continent of Mu.
He handed out 2 bulky envelopes.
Guatuone, you get this charming snake story. I want variations of it scattered throughout Africa and the Near East.
He handed out another envelope.
Unica, you get the Urantia story, but that one isn't to be released until fairly late in the game.
He picked up the 5th envelope and smiled again.
Gajetsi, my love, you get the Atlantis story, with certain changes that make us out to be the most double-dyed bastards in all history. Let me explain the purpose behind that.
And in 1974, the 4 members of the American Medical Association gazed somberly down at Joe Malik from his office wall. It looked to be a long day, and there was nothing to anticipate as exciting as last night had been. There was a thick manuscript in a manila envelope in the inbox. He noticed that the stamps had been removed. That was doubtless Pat Walsh's work. Her kid brother was a stamp collector. Joe smiled, remembering the diary he'd kept when he was a teenager. In case his parents found it, he always referred to masturbation as stamp collecting.
Collected 5 stamps today, a new record. After 5 days of no stamps, collected a beauty in several colors. Enormous, but the negotiations were tiring.
Doubtless today's kids, if they kept diaries, they probably used cassette tape recorders, either talked openly about it or considered it too incidental to mention. Joe shook his head. The Catholic teenager he had been in 1946 was no more remote than the crumbling liberal he'd been in 1968. And yet, in spite of all he'd been through, much of the time he felt that all of the knowledge didn't make a difference. People like Pat and Peter still treated him as if he were the same man, and he still did the same job in the same way. He took the heavy manuscript out and shook the envelope. Damn it, there was no return envelope. Well, working at a magazine like Confrontation, whose contributors were mostly radicals and the kinds of kooks who were willing to write for no bread, you didn't really expect them to enclose stamped self-addressed envelopes. There was a covering letter. Joe sucked in his breath when he saw the golden apple embossed in the upper left-hand corner.
Hail, Eris, and hi, Joe. Here is a brilliant original interpretation of international finance called Vampirism, the Heliocentric Theory and the Gold Standard. It's by Jorge Lobengula, a really far-out young Discordian thinker. Jams don't go in much for writing, but Discordians fortunately do. If you find it worth printing, you may have it at your usual rates. Make the check payable to the Fernando Poo secessionist movement, and send it to Jorge at 15 Rue Hassan, Algiers 8. Incidentally, Jorge will not be involved in the Fernando Poo coup. He is turning toward a synergistic economics, which will gradually lead him to see the folly of Fernando Poo going it alone. And the coup itself, of course, will not be any of our doing. But Jorge will be a key figure in Equatorial Guinea's subsequent economic recovery, assuming the world pulls through that particular mess. If you can't use this paper, burn it. Jorge has plenty of copies. 5 tons of flax. Mal. P.S. The Fernando Poo rebellion may still be 1 or 2 years in the future, so don't jump to the conclusion that the pot is coming to a boil already. Remember what I told you about the goose in the bottle. M.
Down the hall in the ladies' room, bolting the door for privacy, Pat Walsh takes her transistorized transmitter from her pantyhose and broadcasts to the receiver at the Council on Foreign Relations headquarters half a block east.
I'm still writing lots of Illuminati research papers, and they'll give him plenty of false leads. The big news today is an article on Eurasian economics by a Fernando Poo national. It came with a covering letter signed Mal, and from the context, I feel fairly certain it's the original Malaclips the Elder himself. If not, at least we've got a lead on that damned elusive Malaclips the Younger. The envelope was postmarked Mad Dog, Texas.
Joe put down Mal's letter, trying to remember the obscure references to Fernando Poo before the movie last night. Someone had said something was going to happen there. Maybe he should get a stringer on the island, or even send somebody over. A malicious grin crossed his face. It might be interesting to send Peter. First some then a trip to Fernando Poo. That might fix Peter up. Joe flipped through the Lobengula manuscript quickly, scanning. There were no Fnords. That was a relief. He had become painfully conscious of them since Hagbard had removed the aversion reflex, and each Fnord had sent a pang through him that was a ghost of the low-grade emergency in which he had previously lived. He turned back to the first page and began to read in earnest.
Vampirism, the Heliocentric Theory, and the Gold Standard, by Jorge Lobengula. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Joe stopped. That sentence had been used in the Black Mass in Chicago, and further back he knew it was the code of the Abbey of Thelema in Rabelais. But there was something else about it that chewed at his consciousness, something that suggested a hidden meaning. This was not just a first axiom of anarchism. There was something else there, something more hermetic. He looked back at Mal's letter.
Remember what I told you about the goose in the bottle.
That was a simple riddle used by Zen masters in the training of monks, Joe remembered. You take a newborn gosling and slip it through the neck of a bottle. Month after month, you keep it in there and feed it until it is a full-grown goose and can no longer be passed through the bottle's neck. The question is, without breaking the bottle, how do you get the goose out? Neither riddle seemed to shed much light on the other.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. How do you get the goose out of the bottle? Holy God!
Joe laughed.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. The goose gets out of the bottle the same way John Dillinger got out of the escape-proof Crown Point jail. Jesus motherfucking Christ!
Joe gasped.
It's alive!
Just like a tree that's standing by the water, we shall not be moved. The only place where all 5 Illuminati Primi met was the Great Hall of Gruad in Agadi, the 30,000-year-old Illuminati center on the peaks of the Tibetan Himalayas, with a lower-level waterfront harbor on the vast underground Sea of Valusia.
We will report in the usual order,
said Brother Gracchus Gruad, pressing a button in the table before him so his words would automatically be recorded on the impervium wire for the Illuminati archives.
First of all, Fernando Poo. Jorge Lobengula, having decided that the combined resources of Fernando Poo and Rio Muni can be reallocated, so as to increase the per capita wealth of citizens of both provinces, has accordingly broken with the Fernando Poo separatists and returned to Rio Muni, where he hopes to persuade Fang leaders to go along with his schemes for economic redevelopment. Our plans now center on a Captain Ernesto Tequila y Mota, one of the few Caucasians left on Fernando Poo. He has good contacts among the wealthier Bubi, the ones who favor separatism, and he is inordinately ambitious. I don't think we need contemplate a change in timetable.
I should hope not,
said Brother Marcus Marconi.
It would be such a shame not to immanentize the eschaton on May 1st.
Well, we can't count on May 1st,
said Brother Gracchus Gruad.
But with 3 distinct plans pointing in that direction, one of them is bound to hit. Let's hear from you, Brother Marcus.
Charles Mocenigo has now reached anthrax leprosy moo. A few more nightmares at the right moment, and he'll be home.
Sister Theta Theodora spoke next.
Atlanta Hope and God's lightning are becoming more powerful all the time. The president will be scared shitless of her when the time comes, and he'll be ready to be even more totalitarian than her, just to keep her from taking over.
I don't trust Drake,
said Brother Marcus Marconi.
Of course,
said Brother Gracchus Gruad.
But he has builded his house by the sea.
And he who builds by the sea builds on sand,
said Brother Otto Agatai.
My turn. Our record, Give, Sympathize, Control, is an international hit. Our next tour of Europe should be an extraordinary success. Then we can begin, very slowly and tentatively, negotiations for the Walpurgisnacht Festival. Anyone who tries to develop the idea prematurely, of course, will have to be deflected.
Or liquidated,
said Brother Gracchus Gruad. He looked down the long table at the man who sat by himself at the far end.
Now you've been silent all this time. What do you have to say?
The man laughed.
A few words from the skeleton at the feast, eh?
This was the fifth and most formidable Illuminatus Primus, Brother Henry Hastur, the only one who would have the gall to name himself after a Loiger.
It is written,
he said,
that the universe is the practical joke by the general at the expense of the particular. Do not be too quick to laugh or weep if you believe this saying. All I can say is, there is a serious threat in being to all your plans. I warn you. You have been warned. You may all die. Are you afraid of death? You need not answer. I see that you are. That in itself may be a mistake. I have tried to explain to you about not fearing death, but you will not listen. All your other problems follow from that.
The other four Illuminati Primi listened in cold, disdainful silence and did not reply.
If all are one,
the fifth Illuminatus added significantly,
all violence is masochism.
If all are one,
Brother Otto replied nastily,
all sex is masturbation. Let's have no more Mihu metaphysics here.
Hare Krishna, Hare Hare.
George!
Then George was here with Chelene in Ingolstadt. This was going to be tricky. George's head was bent over an earthenware stein, doubtless full of the local brew.
George!
Joe called again. George looked up, and Joe was astonished. He had never seen George like this before. George shook his shoulder-length blonde hair to clear it away from his face, and Joe looked deep into his eyes. They were strange eyes, eyes without fear or pity or guilt, eyes that acknowledged that the natural state of man was one of perpetual surprise, and therefore could not be greatly surprised by any one thing, even the unexpected appearance of Joe Malik.
What has Chelene done to him in the past 7 days?
Joe wondered.
Has he destroyed his mind, or has he illuminated him?
Actually, it was George's 10th stein of beer that day, and he was very, very drunk.
Harry Robot, Harry.
Civil liberties were suspended and a state of national emergency declared during a special presidential broadcast on all channels between noon and 12:30 on April 30th. 15 minutes later, the first rioting started in New York, at the Port Authority on 41st Street, where a mob attempted to overrun the police and steal buses in which to escape to Canada. It was 6:45 p.m. just then in Ingolstadt, and Count Dracula and his brides were giving forth a rag-a-rock version of an old Walt Disney cartoon song. And in Los Angeles, where it was 9:45 a.m., a 5-person Morituri group hurriedly convened, decided to use up all its bombs against police stations immediately.
Cripple the motherfucker before it's heavy,
said their leader, a 16-year-old girl with braces on her teeth. Her idiom, in standard English, meant paralyze the fascist state before it's entrenched. And Saul, trusting the pole vaulter in the unconscious, was leading Barney and Markov Cheney into the mouth of Lehman Cavern. Carmel, nearly a kilometer south of them and several hundred feet closer to the center of the earth, still clutched his briefcase and its 5 million green gods. But he did not move. Near him were the bones of a dozen bats he had eaten.
To be a bat's a bum thing, a silly and a dumb thing, but at least a bat is something, and you're not a thing at all.
Joe Malik, hit by the Raga Rock as if by an avalanche of separate notes which were each boulders, felt his body dissolve. Count Dracula wailed it again.
You're not a thing at all.
And Joe felt mind crumble along with body and could find no center, no still point in the waves of sound and energy. The fucking acid was Hagbard's ally and had turned against him. He was dying. Even the words, "Hey, that cat's on a bummer," came from far away, and his effort to determine if that really meant him collapsed into an effort to remember what the words were, which imploded into an uncertainty about what effort he was trying to make, mental or physical, and why.
Because,
he cried out.
Because...
But because meant nothing.
You're nothing but a nothing. Nothing but a nothing.
But I can't take acid now,
George had protested.
I'm so damn drunk on this Bavarian beer, it's sure to be a down trip.
Everybody takes acid,
Hagbard said coldly.
Those are Miss Portinari's orders, and she's right. We can only face this thing if our minds are completely open to the outside.
Hey, Dig,
Clark Kent said.
That French cat eating the popsicle.
Yeah,
said one of the supermen.
It's Jean-Paul Sartre. Who'd ever expect to see him here?
Kent shook his head.
Hope to hell he stays long enough to hear our gig. Shit, the influence that man has had on me, he should hear it come back at him in music.
That's your trip, baby,
a second superman said.
I don't give a fuck what any motherfucking honky thinks about our music.
You're nothing but nothing.
Mick Jagger hasn't even played Sympathy for the Devil yet, and already the trouble has started.
An English voice drawled. Attila and his Huns were trying to do acute bodily damage to the Senate and the people of Rome. Both groups were speeding, and they had gotten into a very intellectual discussion of the meaning of one of Dylan's lyrics. A Hun bopped a Roman with a beer stein as another voice mumbled something about Tyle Eulenspiegel's merry pranks.
You're not a thing at all.
Joe had always had the policy at confrontation that real screwballs should be sent to him for interviewing, but the little fat man who came in didn't seem particularly crazy. He just had the bland, regular, somewhat smallish features of a typical wasp.
The name is James Cass Cartwright,
the fat man said, holding out his hand.
And the subject is consciousness energy.
The subject of what?
Oh, this here article I have written for you.
Cartwright reached into his alligator briefcase and pulled out a thick sheaf of typewritten paper. It was an odd size, possibly 8 by 10. He handed the manuscript to Joe.
What kind of paper is this?
Said Joe.
Well, it's a standard size in England,
said Cartwright.
When I was over there in 1963, visiting the tombs of my ancestors, I bought 10 reams of it. I took the plane from Dallas on November 22nd, the day Kennedy was shot. Synchronicity. Also, I sneezed the moment the gunman squeezed. More synchronicity. But about this paper, I've never used anything else for my writing since then. Kinda gives a man a nice feeling to know that all the trees that went into my paper were chopped down over 10 years ago, and no trees have died since then to support the proliferation of Jim Cartwright's philosophical foliage.
Well, that certainly is a wonderful thing,
said Joe, thinking how much he loathed ecological moralists. During the height of the ecology fad back in 1970 and 71, several people had actually had the nerve to write Joe saying that ecologically responsible journals like Confrontation had a duty to cease publication in order to save trees.
Just what fruit have your philosophical researches borne, Mr. Cartwright?
He asked.
Golden apples of the sun, silver apples of the moon,
said Cartwright with a smile. Joe saw Lilith Velcor defying Gruad atop the Pyramid of the Eye.
Well, sir,
said Cartwright,
my basic finding is that life energy pervades the entire universe, just as light and gravity do. Therefore, all life is one, just as all light is one. All energies, you see, are broadcast from a central source, yet to be found. If 4 amino acids, adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine, suddenly become life when you throw them together, then all chemicals are potentially alive. You and me and the fish and bugs are that kind of life, made from adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine, DNA life. What we call dead matter is another kind of life, non-DNA life. Okay so far? If awareness is life, and if life is one, then the awareness of the individual is just one of the universe's sensory organs. The universe produces beings like us in order to perceive itself. You might think of it as a giant self-contained eye.
Joe remained impassive. Cartwright went on.
Consciousness is therefore also manifested as telepathy, clairvoyance, and telekinesis. Those phenomena are simply non-localized versions of consciousness. I'm very interested in telepathy, and I've had a lot of success with telepathic research. These cases of communication are just further evidence that consciousness is a seamless web throughout the universe.
Now wait a minute,
said Joe.
Automobiles run on mechanical energy, heat energy, and electrical energy. But that doesn't mean that all the automobiles in the world are in contact with each other.
What burns?
Said Cartwright, smiling.
You mean in a car? Well, the gas ignites explosively in the cylinder.
Only organic matter burns,
said Cartwright smugly.
And all organic matter is descended from a single cell. All fire is one, and all automobiles do communicate with each other. You can't tell me anything about gas or oil, or cars. I'm a Texan. Did I tell you that?
Joe shook his head.
Just what part of Texas are you from?
Little place called Mad Dog.
Had a notion you might be. Tell me, Mr. Cartwright, do you know anything about a conspiratorial organization called the Ancient Illuminated Seers of Bavaria?
Well, I know 3 organizations that have similar names. The Ancient Bavarian Conspiracy, the New Bavarian Conspiracy, and the Conservative Bavarian Seers.
Joe nodded. Cartwright didn't seem to have the facts straight, as Joe knew them. Perhaps the fat man had other pieces of the puzzle, perhaps fewer pieces than Joe had. Still, if they were different, they might be useful.
Each of these organizations controls one of the major TV networks in the U.S.,
said Cartwright.
The initials of each network have been intentionally chosen to refer back to the name of the group that runs it. They also control all the big magazines and newspapers. That's why I came to you. Judging by the stuff you've been getting away with printing lately, not only do the Illuminati not control your magazine, but you seem to have the benefit of some pretty powerful protection.
So, there are 3 separate Illuminati groups, and among them they dominate all the communications media. Is that correct?
Said Joe.
That's right,
said Cartwright, his face as cheerful as if he were explaining how his wife made ice cream with a hand freezer.
They dominate the motion picture industry, too. They took a hand in the making of hundreds of movies, the best known of which are Gunga Din and Citizen Kane. Those 2 movies are especially full of Illuminati references, symbols, code messages, and subliminal propaganda. Rosebud, for instance, is their code name for the oldest Illuminati symbol, the so-called Rosy Cross. You know what that means.
He snickered lewdly. Joe nodded.
So, you know about flowery combat?
Cartwright shrugged.
Who doesn't? Dr. Horace Naismith, a learned friend of mine, and head of the John Dillinger Died for You Society, has written an analysis of Gunga Din, pointing out the real meaning of the Thuggee, the evil goddess Kali, the pit full of serpents, the elephant medicine, the blowing of the bugle from the top of the temple, and so forth. Gunga Din celebrates the imposition of law and order in an area terrorized by the criminal followers of a goddess who breeds evil and chaos. The Thuggee are a caricature of the Discordians, and the English represent the Illuminati's view of themselves. The Illuminati love that movie.
Sometimes I wonder if we're not all working for them one way or another,
said Joe, trying deliberately to be ambivalent to see which way Cartwright would move.
Well, sure we are,
said Cartwright.
Everything we do that contributes to a lack of harmony in the human race helps them. They are forever shaking up society with experiments involving suffering and death for large numbers of people. For instance, consider the General Slocum disaster on June 15, 1904. Note that 19 plus 04 equals 23, by the way.
Oh, him too?
Joe groaned mentally.
He's got to be either one of us or one of them. And if he's one of them, why is he telling me so much?
You tell me,
Cartwright said.
If all consciousness is not one, just how did Joyce happen to pick the very next day for Ulysses so the General Slocum disaster would be in the newspaper his characters read? You see, Joyce knew he was a genius, but he never did understand the nature of genius, which is to be in better touch with the universal consciousness than the average man is. Anyway, the Illuminati were trying, with the General Slocum disaster, a new, more economical technique for achieving transcendental illumination,
one that would require only a few hundred sudden deaths instead of thousands. Not that they care about saving lives, you understand, though the desire might result from the return of the repressed original purpose of the Illuminati, which was benign.
Really?
Said Joe.
What was the benign purpose?
The preservation of human knowledge after the natural catastrophe that destroyed the continent of Atlantis and the first human civilization 30,000 years ago,
said Cartwright.
Natural catastrophe?
Yes. A solar flare that erupted just when Atlantis was turned toward the sun. The original Illuminati were scientists who predicted the solar flare, but were scoffed at by their fellows, so they fled by themselves. The benevolence of those early Illuminati was replaced by elitist attitudes in their successors, but the benign purpose keeps coming back in the form of factions, which arise among the Illuminati and split off. The factions preserve traditional Illuminati secrecy, but they aim to thwart the destructiveness of the parent body. The justified ancients of Mu were expelled from the Illuminati back in 1888. But the oldest anti-Illuminati conspiracy is the Arisian Liberation Front, which splintered off before the beginnings of the current civilization. Then there's the Discordian movement, another splinter faction, but they're almost as bad as the Illuminati. They're sort of like a cross between followers of Ayn Rand and Scientologists. They've got this guy named Hagbard Co, their head honcho. You didn't read about it because the governments of the world were too scared shitless to do anything about it. But 5 years ago, this Chilean character infiltrated the nuclear submarine service of the U.S. Navy for the Illuminati and stole a sub. He's a super salesman, Chilean he is. He could talk old H.L. Hunt right out of half his oil wells. He was a chief petty officer. First, he converted about half the crew with the most incredible line of bullshit you've heard since Tim Leary was in his prime. Then he put some kind of drug in the ship's air supply, and while they were under the influence, he converted most of the others. The ones that were stubborn, he just blew out through the torpedo tubes. Nice guy. Now, mind you, this sub was armed with Polaris missiles. So the next thing Chilean does is get himself off to some place in the ocean where they can't find him and blackmail the fucking governments of the U.S., the USSR, and Red China to each give him $10 million in gold. And after he gets the $30 million, he'll scuttle his missiles. Otherwise, he'll dump them on a city of one of those three countries.
Was Chilean still working for the Illuminati at that point?
Hell no!
Cartwright snorted.
That's not how they play the game. They like to operate stealthily, behind the throne room curtains. They work with poison and daggers and things, not H-bombs. No, Chilean told the Illuminati to go fuck themselves, and there was nothing they could do but grind their teeth. He's been operating like a pirate ever since. And I'll tell you something else. There's more than one world leader, including the Illuminati leaders, that hasn't been able to sleep at night because of what else Hagbard Co has on that submarine.
What's that, Mr. Cartwright?
Well, see, the U.S. government did a very dumb thing. They weren't satisfied to have just nuclear weapons aboard their Polaris submarines for a while. They also thought the sub should be armed with the other kind of weapon, bugs.
Joe felt himself go cold, and the back of his neck prickled. Let others worry about the nuclear devastation all they want. Disease, the extinction of the human race through the spread of some man-made plague for which man would have no remedy, was his particular nightmare. Maybe because at the age of 7 he'd very nearly died of polio. Though he'd been healthy ever since, the fear of fatal illness had been impossible to shake.
This Hagbard Co, these Discordians, have a bacteriological weapon aboard the submarine?
Yeah. Something called anthrax tau. All Chilean has to do is release it in the water, and within a week, the whole human race will be dead. Spreads faster than a $2 whore on Saturday night. Any living thing can carry it, but one nice thing about it, it's fatal only to man. If Chilean ever gets crazy enough to use it, and he's pretty crazy these days and getting worse all the time, it'll give the planet a fresh start, so to speak. Some other life form could evolve into sentience. Now, If we have a nuclear war, or if we pollute the planet to death, there won't be any life left worth talking about. Might be the best thing that ever happened if Hagbard Co shot that anthrax towel down the tube. It would sure prevent worse things from happening.
If there were no one left alive,
said Joe,
from whose point of view would it be the best thing that ever happened?
Life's,
said Cartwright.
I told you, all life is one. Which gets me back to my manuscript. I'll just leave it with you. I realize it's much longer than what you usually publish, so feel free to excerpt from it as you please, and to pay me at your usual rates for whatever you publish.
That evening, Joe stayed till 9 at his office. He was, as usual, a day late getting copy to the typesetter on his editorial column and the letters column. These were the two parts of the magazine that he felt only he could do right, and he refused to delegate either job to Peter or anyone else on the staff. First, he ran the letters through his typewriter, shortening and pointing them up, then adding brief editorial answers where called for. After that, he put aside his notes and research for the editorial he'd planned for this August issue, and instead he wrote an impassioned plea that each reader make himself personally responsible for doing something about the menace of bacteriological warfare. Even if what Cartwright had told him was a crock, it reminded him of his long-held conviction that germ warfare was far more likely to put the quietus to the human race than nuclear weapons. It was just too easy to unleash. He envisioned Hagbard in his submarine spewing the microbes of all-destroying plague out into the seas, and he shuddered. His briefcase, weighed down by Cartwright's manuscript, which he decided to take home with him. He stood in the lobby of his office building, gazing gloomily at the tanks full of tropical fish in the window of the pet store. One tank had, as an ornament, a china model of a sunken pirate ship. It made Joe think again of Hagbard Co. Did he trust Hagbard or didn't he? Was it possible to really believe in a Hagbard with the Captain Nemo psychosis, brooding over tubes and jars full of bacteria cultures, one hairy finger hovering tentatively over a button that would send a torpedo full of anthrax tau germs out into the inky waters of the Atlantic? Within a week, all humans would die, Cartwright had said, and it was hard to think that Cartwright was lying, since he knew so much about so many other things. When Joe got home, he put on his favorite Museum of National History record, The Language and Music of the Wolves, and lit up a joint. He liked listening to the wolves when he was high, trying to understand their language. Then he took Cartwright's manuscript out of his briefcase and looked at the title page. It didn't say a word about consciousness energy. Indeed, it referred to a subject Joe found much more interesting.
How the ancient Bavarian conspiracy plotted and carried out the assassinations of Malcolm X, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., George Lincoln Rockwell, Robert Kennedy, Richard M. Nixon, George Wallace, Jane Fonda, Gabriel Conrad, and Hank Brummer. Well,
said Joe,
I'll be fucked.
It was quite a trip,
said Hagbard Co.
You're quite a tripper,
Miss Portnari replied.
You really did Harry Coyne very well. Probably just the way he'll do it when he gets up the nerve to come see me.
It was simpler than doing my own trip,
Hagbard said wearily.
My guilt is much deeper because I know more. It was easier to take his guilt trip than to take my own.
And it's over? Your fur no longer bristles?
I know who I am and why I'm here. Adenine, cytosine, guanine, thymine.
How did you ever forget?
Hagbard grinned.
It's easy to forget. You know that.
She smiled back.
Blessed be, Captain.
Blessed be,
he said. Returning to his stateroom, he was still subdued. The vision of the self-begotten and the serpent eating its own tail had broken the lines of word, image, and emotional energy that were steering him toward the dark night of the soul again. But resolving his personal problem did not rescue the demonstration or help him cope with the oncoming disaster. It merely freed him to begin anew. It merely reminded him that the end is the beginning and humility is endless. It merely, merrily, turned the wheel another tarot-towery connection. He realized he was still tripping a little. That was readily fixed. Harry Coyne was tripping, and he was not Harry Coyne right now. Hagbard, remembering again who he was and why he was there, opened his stateroom door. Joe Malik sat in a chair under an octopus mural and regarded him with a level glance.
Who killed John Kennedy?
Joe asked calmly.
I want a straight answer this time, HC.
Hagbard relaxed into another chair, smiling gently.
That one finally registered, eh? I told John all those years ago to emphasize that you should never trust anyone with the initials HC, and yet you've gone on trusting me and never noticing.
I noticed, but it seemed too wild to take seriously.
John Kennedy was killed by a man named Harold Canberra, who lived on Fullerton Avenue in Chicago near the Seminary restaurant where you and Simon first discussed his theories of numerology. Dillinger had moved back to that neighborhood for a while in the late 50s because he liked to go to the Biograph Theater for old time's sake, and Canberra was his landlord, a very sane, ordinary, rather dull individual. Then, in Dallas in 1963, John saw him blow the president's head off before Oswald or Harry Coyne or the Mafia gun could fire.
Hagbard paused to light a cigar.
We investigated Canberra afterward, like scientists investigating the first extraterrestrial life form. You can imagine how thorough we were. He had no politics at all at the time, which puzzled the hell out of us. It turned out that Canberra had put a lot of money into Blue Sky Inc., a firm that made devices for landing on low-gravity planets. It was back in the very early 50s. Finally, Eisenhower's hostility to the space program drove Blue Sky to the bottom of the board, and Canberra sold out at a terrible loss. Then Kennedy came in and announced that the U.S. was going to put a man on the moon. The stocks he'd sold were suddenly worth millions. Canberra's brain snapped. That was all. Killing Kennedy and getting away with it turned him skizzy, finally. He went in for spiritualism for a while, and then later joined White Heroes Opposing Red Extremism, one of the really paranoid anti-Illuminati groups, and ran a telephone message service giving whore propaganda.
And nobody else ever suspected?
Joe asked.
Canberra is still there in Chicago going about his business, just another face on the street?
Not quite. He was shot a few years ago, due to you.
Due to me?
Yes, he was one of the subjects in the first test. He subsequently made the mistake of knocking up the daughter of a local politician. It appears that the made him susceptible to libertine ideas.
We're gonna rock, 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 till broad daylight.
You sound very convincing, and I almost believe you,
Joe said slowly.
Why all of a sudden? Why no more put-ons and runarounds?
We're getting to the chimes at midnight.
Hagbard replied simply, with a Latin shrug.
The spell is ending. Soon the coach turns back to a pumpkin, Cinderella goes back to the kitchen, everybody takes their masks off, and the carnival is over. I mean it.
He added, his face full of sincerity.
Ask me anything, and you get the truth.
Why are you keeping George and me apart? Why do I have to skulk around the sub like a wanted fugitive and eat with Callie and Eichmann? Why don't you want George and me to compare notes?
Hagbard sighed.
The real explanation for that would take a day. You'd have to understand the whole Chilean system first. In the baby talk of conventional psychology, I'm taking away George's father figures. You're one, his first and only boss, an older man he trusts and respects. I became another very quickly, and that's one of the 1,001 reasons I turned the guruhood over to Miss Portinari. He had to confront Drake, the bad father, and lose you and me, the good fathers, before he could really learn to ball a woman. The next step, if you're curious, is to take the woman away from him temporarily.
Hagbard added quickly.
Don't be so jumpy. You've been through a large part of the Chilean system and it hasn't killed you. You're stronger because of it, aren't you?
Joe nodded, accepting this, but shot the next question immediately.
Do you know who bombed Confrontation?
Yes, Joe, and I know why you did it.
You're not a thing at all.
Okay then, here's the payoff, and your answer better be good. Why are you helping the Illuminati to immanentize the eschaton, Hagbard?
It's steam engines when it comes steam engine time, as a very wise man once said.
Jesus,
Joe said wearily.
I thought I had crossed that palm, Asinorum. When I figured out how you get the goose out of the bottle in the Zen riddle, you do nothing and wait for the goose to peck its way out just like a chick pecks its way out of an egg, I realized do what thou wilt becomes the whole of the law by a mathematical process. The equation balances when you realize who the thou is, as distinguished from the ordinary you. The whole fucking works, the universe, all of it, alive in the same way we're alive, and mechanical in the same way we're mechanical. The robot. The one more trustworthy than all the Buddhas and sages. Oh Christ, yes, I thought I understood it all. But this stone fatalism, what the hell are we going to Ingolstadt for if we can't do anything?
The coin has two sides. It's the only coin that comes up at this time, but it still has two sides.
Hagbard leaned forward intensely.
It's mechanical and alive. Let me give you a sexual metaphor, since you usually hang out with New York intellectuals. You look at a woman across a room and you know you're going to bed with her before the night is over. That's mechanical. Something has happened when your eyes met. But the orgasm is organic. What it will be like, neither of you can predict. And I know, just as the Illuminati know, that immanentization is going to happen on May 1st because of a mechanical process Adam Weishaupt started on another May 1st 2 centuries ago, and because of other processes other people started before then and since then. But neither I nor the Illuminati know what form immanentization will take. It doesn't have to be hell on earth, it can be heaven on earth. And that's why we're going to Ingolstadt.
3 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, rock.
I became a cop because of Billy Frechette. Well, I don't want to jive you. That wasn't the whole reason. But she sure as hell was one bodacious big part of the reason. And that's the curious thing about what finally happened and how Milo Flanagan assigned me to infiltrate the Lincoln Park anarchist group, getting me in right up to my black ass and all that international intrigue and yoga-style ballin' with Simon Moon. But maybe I should start over from the beginning again, from Billy Frechette. I was a little kid and she was an old woman. It was in the early 1950s, you see. Hassan I Saba X was operating in the open then, going around the South Side preaching that the greatest of the white magicians had just died recently in England, and now the age of the black magicians was beginning. Everybody thought he was one stone-crazy stud. And my father was a cook in a restaurant on Halstead. He pointed her out to me on the street once. It must have been just a while before she went back to the reservation in Wisconsin to die. See that old woman, child? She was John Dillinger's girlfriend. Well, I looked, and I saw she was really heavy and together, and that whatever the law had done to her had never broke her. But I also saw that sorrow hung around her like a dark halo. Daddy went on and told me a lot more about her, and about Dillinger. But it was that sorrow that got printed all over every cell in my little baby brain. It took years for me to figure it out, but what it really meant, as an omen or conjure, was that she was basically just like the women of the black gang leaders on the South Side, even if she was Indian. There's just one way for a black in Chicago, and that's to join a gang. Solidarity forever, as Simon would say. But I dug that there was only one gang that was really safe. The biggest gang of all, Mr. Charlie's Boys, the motherfucking establishment. I guess every black cop has that in the back of his head before he finds out that we never really can join that gang. Not as full members, anyway. I found out quicker, being not just black, but female. So I was in the gang, the baddest and heaviest gang, but I was always looking for something better, the impossible, the boss gimmick that would get me off the man's black and white chessboard entirely, into some place where I was myself and not just a pawn being moved around at Charlie's whim. Otto Waterhouse never had that feeling. At least not until near the end of the game. I never did get inside his head enough to know what was going on there. He was a real cop, and he got into my head almost as soon as we met, and I could always feel him watching me, waiting for the time when I would round on Charlie and go over to the other side. So the best I can do in making him is to say that he was no Tom in the ordinary sense. He didn't screw blacks for the man. He screwed blacks for himself. It was strictly his own trip. Otto was my drop after I got assigned to underground work. We met in a place that I could always have an excuse to visit, a rundown law firm called Washington, Weishaupt, Budweiser, and Keefe on 23 North Clark. Later, for some reason I was never told, they changed the name to Ruley, Kempt, Shoveled, and Kooth, and then to Weary, Stale, Flat, and Profitable. And to keep up the front, they actually did hire a couple of lawyers and did some real law work for a corporation called Blue Sky Inc.
On April 29th, still harboring a cargo of doubt about Hagbard, Joe Malik decided to try the simplest method of tarot divination. Concentrating all his energy on the question, he cut the deck and picked out one card that would reveal Hagbard Cheleen's true nature, if the divination worked. With a sinking heart, he saw that he had come up with the Hierophant. Running the mnemonics Simon had taught him, Joe quickly identified this figure with the number 5. The Hebrew letter vow, meaning nail, and the traditional interpretation of a false show, a hypocrisy or a trick. 5 was the number of Grummet, the destructive and chaotic end of a cycle. Vow was the letter associated with quarrels, and the meaning nail was often related to the implement of Christ's death. The card was telling him that Hagbard was a hypocritical trickster aiming at destruction, a murderer of the dreamer-redeemer aspect of humanity. Or, taking a more mystical reading, as was usually advisable with the tarot, Hagbard only seemed to be these things, and was actually an agent of resurrection and rebirth. As Christ had to die before he could become the Father, as, in Vedanta, the false self must be obliterated to join the great self. Joe swore. The card was only reflecting his own uncertainty. He rummaged in the bookshelf Hagbard had provided for his stateroom and found 3 books on the tarot. The first, a popular manual, was absolutely useless. It identified the Hierophant with the letter of religion, in contrast to the spirit, with conformity, and with all the plastic middle-class values Hagbard conspicuously lacked. The second, by a true adept of the tarot, just led him back to his own confused reading of the card, remarking that the Hierophant is mysterious, even sinister. He seems to be enjoying a very secret joke at somebody's expense. The third work raised more doubts. It was Liber 555 by somebody named Mordecai Malignatus, which vaguely reminded Joe that the old East Village Other chart of the Illuminati conspiracy showed a Mordecai the Foul in charge of the Sphere of Chaos. And Mordecai Malignatus was a fair Latinization of Mordecai the Foul. Mordecai, Joe remembered, was, according to that half-accurate and half-deceptive chart, in dual control, along with Richard Nixon, then living, of the Elders of Zion, the House of Rothschild, the Politburo, the Federal Reserve System, the U.S. Communist Party, and Students for a Democratic Society. Joe flipped the pages to see what the semi-mythical Mord had to say about the Hierophant. The chapter was brief. It was in The Book of Republicans and Sinners, and said, 5. Vow, nail. The Hierophant. They nailed love to a cross, symbolic of their might. But love was undefeated. It simply didn't fight. 5 stone men were in a courtyard when an elephant entered. The first man was stoned on sleep, and he saw not the elephant, but dreamed instead of things unreal to those awake. The second man was stoned on nicotine, caffeine, DDT, carbohydrate excess, protein deficiency, and the other chemicals in the diet which the Illuminati have enforced upon the half-awake to keep them from fully waking. "Hey," he said, "there's a big smelly beast in our courtyard." The third stone man was on grass, and he said, "No, dads, that's the ghostly old party in its true nature, the dark nicks on the soul." And he giggled in a silly way. The fourth stone man was tripping on peyote, and he said, "You see not the mystery, for the elephant is a poem written in tons instead of words," and his eyes danced. The fifth stone man was on acid, and he said nothing, merely worshipping the elephant in silence as the father of Buddha. And then the Hierophant entered and drove a nail of mystery into all their hearts, saying, "You are all elephants." Nobody understood him. At 8 o'clock in Ingolstadt, an unscheduled group called the Cargo Cult managed to get the mic and began blasting out their own outer space arrangement of an old children's song. She'll be comin' round the mountain when she comes. She'll be comin' round the mountain when she comes. And in Washington, where it was still only 2 in the afternoon, the White House was in flames, while the National Guard machine-gunned an armed mob crossing the mall in front of the Washington Monument, a single finger pointing upward in an eloquent and vulgar gesture which only the Illuminati knew meant, "fuck you." In Los Angeles, where it was 11 in the morning, the bombs started to go off in police stations. And in Lehman Cavern, Markov Cheney disgustedly pointed out a graffito to Saul and Barney. "Help stamp out sizeism. Take a midget to lunch."
You see?
He demanded.
That's supposed to be funny. It's not funny at all. Not one damn bit.
She'll be driving 6 white horses. She'll be driving 6 white horses. She'll be driving 6 white horses when she comes. On April 29th, Hagbard invited George to join him on the bridge of the Leif Erikson. They had been sailing through a smooth-walled tubular passage that was completely filled with water, and was both underground and below sea level. It had been built by the Atlanteans, and not only had survived the catastrophe, but had been maintained in good condition for the next 30,000 years by the Illuminati. There was even a salt lock, located roughly under Lyon, France, which served to keep the salt water of the Atlantic out of the further reaches of the passage and the underground freshwater sea of Volusia. The underground waterways were connected with many lakes in Switzerland, Bavaria, and Eastern Europe, Hagbard explained, and if salt water were found in all of those lakes, the existence of the weird subsurface world of the Illuminati would be suspected. As the submarine approached a huge circular hatchway barring the passage, Hagbard turned off the devices that rendered the craft indetectable. Immediately, the enormous round metal door swung toward them.
"Won't the Illuminati know we've activated this machinery?"
said George.
"No, this works automatically,"
said Hagbard.
"It's never occurred to them that anyone else might use this passageway."
"But they know you could. And you guessed wrong about their spider ships being able to detect you."
Hagbard whirled on George, a hairy arm lifted to punch him in the chest.
"Shut up about the fucking spider ships. I don't want to hear any more about the spider ships. Portinari's running the show now, and she says it's safe, okay?"
"Commander, you're out of your fucking mind,"
George said firmly. Hagbard laughed, his shoulders slumping slightly in relaxation.
"All right. You can get off the sub any time you want to. We'll just open the hatch and let you swim out."
"You're out of your fucking mind. But I'm stuck with you,"
said George, clapping Hagbard on the shoulder.
"You're either on the sub or off the sub,"
said Hagbard.
"Watch this."
The Leif Erikson had sailed through the round metal gateway, which closed behind it. Here, the ceiling of the underwater passage was about 50 feet higher than it had been in the section they had just left, and the tunnel was only partially filling with water. The air seemed to be coming from vents in the ceiling. There was another metal hatchway in the distance down the tunnel.
"This lock is pretty big,"
George said.
"The Illuminati must have sailed some enormous submarines through here."
"And animals,"
said Hagbard. The hatchway ahead of them opened, and fresh water came pouring in. The water level in the lock rose until it reached the ceiling, and the Leif Erikson's engines turned over and began to propel it forward once more. Now George is writing in his diary again.
April 29th. And what the hell does it mean to say that life shouldn't change too rapidly? How fast is evolution? Do you measure it in terms of lifetime? A year's more than a lifetime to many kinds of animals, while 70 years is an hour in the lifetime of a sequoia. And the universe is only 10 billion years old. How fast do 10 billion years go? To a god, they might go very fast indeed. They might all happen at once. Suppose the lifetime of your typical basic god was 100 quintillion years. The whole lifetime of this universe would be to him no more than the amount of time it takes us to watch a movie. So, from the point of view of a god or of the universe, things evolve very quickly. It's like one of those Walt Disney films where you watch a plant growing before your eyes, and the whole cycle from bud to fruit takes about 2 minutes. To a god, life is a single organism proliferating in all directions all over the Earth, and now on the Moon and Mars, and the whole process from the first of the protobionts to George Dorn and fellow humans takes no longer than...
Hagbard's voice over the intercom jolted him out of his reverie.
Come on back up, George. There's more to see.
This time Mavis was on the bridge with Hagbard. As George entered, Hagbard withdrew his hand from her left breast in an unhurried movement. George wanted to kill Hagbard, but he was thankful that he hadn't seen Mavis touching Hagbard in any sexual way. That would have been past bearing. He might have tested his newfound courage by taking a poke at Hagbard, and goddess only knows what karate or yoga or magic would be the response. Besides, Mavis and Hagbard must be bawling all the time. Who else but Hagbard would a woman like Mavis take for her regular lover? Who else but Hagbard could satisfy her? Mavis greeted George with a comradely hug that made the entire front of his body ache. Hagbard pointed to an inscription carved in the wall of the cave. There was a row of symbols that George didn't recognize, but above them was something quite familiar, a circle with a downward-pointing trident carved inside it.
The peace symbol?
Said George.
I didn't know it was that old.
In the days when it was put up there,
said Hagbard,
it was called the Cross of Lilith Velkor, and its meaning is simply that anyone who attempts to thwart the Illuminati will suffer from the most horrible torture the Illuminati can devise. Lilith Velkor was one of the first of their victims. They crucified her on a revolving cross that looked very much like that.
You told me it wasn't really a peace symbol,
said George, looking wistfully back at the carving.
But I didn't know what you meant.
There was a Dirigens-grade Illuminatus in Bertrand Russell's circle who put it in somebody's mind that the circle and trident would be a good symbol for the Aldermaston marches to carry. It was very cleverly and subtly done. If the Committee for Nuclear Disarmament had thought about it, what did they need any kind of a symbol for? But Russell and his people fell for it. What they didn't know was that the circle and trident had been a traditional symbol of evil among left-hand path Satanists for thousands of years. So many right-wingers are secret left-hand path magicians and Satanists that, of course, they spotted the symbol for what it was right away. That made them think the Illuminati were behind the peace movement, which threw them off the track, and they accused the peaceniks of using a Satanist symbol, which, to a small extent, discredited the peace movement. A cute gambit.
Why is it there on the wall?
Said George.
The inscription warns the passerby to purify his heart because he is about to enter the Sea of Volusia, which belongs exclusively to the Illuminati. Traveling across the Sea of Volusia, you come eventually to the underground port of Agarty, which was the first Illuminati refuge after the Atlantean catastrophe. We are emerging into the Sea of Volusia right now. Watch.
Hagbard gestured, and George watched open-mouthed as the walls of the cave that closed around them fell away. They were sailing out of the tunnel, but what they seemed to be entering was an infinite fog. The television cameras and their laser wave guides penetrated just as far into this lightless ocean that they were about to navigate as they had into the Atlantic, but this ocean was neither blue nor green, but gray. It was a gray that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions, like an overcast sky. It was impossible to gauge distance. The farthest depth of gray around them might be hundreds of miles away, or it might be right outside the submarine.
Where's the bottom?
He asked.
Too far below us to see,
said Mavis.
The top of this ocean is just a little above the level of the bottom of the Atlantic.
You're so smart,
said Hagbard, pinching her buttock and causing George to flinch.
Don't pay any attention to him, George,
said Mavis.
He's a little bit nervous, and it's making him silly.
Shut the fuck up,
said Hagbard. Beginning to feel anxious himself, wondering if the noble mind of Hagbard Chalene was being overthrown by the weight of responsibility, George turned to look out at the empty ocean. Now he saw that it wasn't quite empty. Fish swam by, some large, some small, many of them grotesque. All were totally eyeless. An octopoidal monster with extremely long, slender tentacles drifted past the submarine, feeling for its prey. There was a covering of fine hairs on the tips of the tentacles. A small fish, also blind, swam close enough to one tentacle to set up a current that disturbed the hairs. Instantly, the octopus's whole body moved in that direction. The disturbed tentacle wrapped itself around the hapless fish, and several others joined in to help scoop it up. The octopus devoured the fish in 3 bites. George was glad to see that at least the blood of these creatures was red. The door behind them opened, and Harry Coyne stepped out onto the bridge.
Morning, everybody. I was just wondering if I might find Miss Mao up here.
She's doing a stint in navigation right now,
said Hagbard.
But stay here and have a look at the Sea of Volusia, Harry.
Harry looked all around, slowly and thoughtfully, then shook his head.
You know, there's times when I start to think you're doing this.
What do you mean, Harry?
Asked Mavis.
You know.
Harry waved a long, snake-like hand.
Doing this like a science fiction movie. You just got us in an abandoned hotel somewheres, and you got a big engine in the basement that shakes the whole place, and here you got some movie cameras, only they point at the screen instead of away from you, if you know what I mean.
Rear projection,
said Hagbard.
Tell me, Harry, what difference would it make if it wasn't real?
Harry thought a moment, his chinless face sour.
We wouldn't have to do what we think we have to do. But even if we don't have to do what we think we have to do, it won't make any difference if we do it. Which means we should just go ahead.
Mavis sighed.
Just go ahead.
Just go ahead,
said Hagbard.
A powerful mantra.
And if we don't go ahead,
said George,
it doesn't matter either. Which means that we just do go ahead.
Another powerful mantra,
said Hagbard.
Just do go ahead.
George noticed a small speck in the distance. As it got closer, he recognized it. He shook his head. Was there no end to the surrealism he'd been subjected to in the last 6 days? A dolphin wearing scuba gear.
Hi, man friends,
said Howard's voice over the loudspeaker on the bridge. George cast a glance at Harry Coyne. The former assassin was standing open-mouthed and limp with astonishment.
Greetings, Howard,
said Hagbard.
How goes it with the Nazis?
dead, sleeping, whatever it is they are. I have a whole porpoise horde, most of them Atlantean adepts, watching them.
And ready to perform other tasks as needed, I hope,
said Hagbard.
Ready indeed,
said Howard. He turned a somersault.
All right,
said Harry Coyne softly.
All right,
he said more firmly.
It's a talking fish, but why the hell is it wearing an oxygen tank and breathing through a fucking mask?
I see we have a new friend on the bridge,
said Howard.
I got the mask from Hagbard's on-shore representative at Fernando Poo. After all, a porpoise has to breathe air. And there is no surface in most of this underground ocean. It's water all the way to the top of the cavernous chambers that contain it. The only place I can get air near here is by swimming to the top of Lake Totenkopf.
Lake Totenkopf monster,
said George with a laugh.
We'll moor the submarine in Lake Totenkopf later today,
said Hagbard.
Howard, I'd like you and your people to stand by tonight and tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, be ready to do a lot of hard physical work. Meanwhile, stay out of the way of the Nazis. The protection they're under is particularly aimed at sea animals, since that was the presumed greatest danger to them. We'll have oxygen equipment as needed for any of your people who want it. Tell them to try to avoid surfacing on the lake unless absolutely necessary. We don't want to attract more attention than we have to.
I salute you in the name of the porpoise horde,
said Howard.
Hail and farewell.
He swam away. A little later, sailing on, they saw in the distance an enormous reptile with 4 paddles for swimming and a neck twice the length of its body. It was in hot pursuit of a school of blind fish.
The Loch Ness Monster,
said Hagbard, and George remembered his little joke about Howard surfacing in Lake Totenkopf.
One of Gruod's genetic experiments with reptiles,
Hagbard went on.
He was really queer for reptiles. He filled the Sea of Volusia with these plesiosaur-like things. Blind, of course, so they could navigate in darkness. Think about that. Eyes are a liability under certain conditions. Gruard figured monsters like that would be another protection against anybody finding Agarty. But the Leif Erikson is too big for Nessie to tangle with, and she knows it.
At last there was a column of yellow light ahead. This was the light let into the Sea of Volusia by Lake Totenkopf. Hagbard explained that the lake was simply a place where the ceiling of rock over the Sea of Volusia had been soft and unstable enough to collapse. The resulting hole being at sea level, filled with water. Debris falling down through the bottom of the lake had formed a mountain below the place where the roof of the Sea of Volusia was punctured.
The Jesuits, of course, always knew that Lake Totenkopf connected with the Sea of Volusia and thus made possible easy contact with Agarty,
Hagbard said.
That's why, when they gave Weishaupt the assignment of founding an overt branch of the Illuminati, they sent him to Ingolstadt, which is right by Lake Totenkopf. And there's the mountain under the lake.
It loomed ahead of them, dark and forbidding. As the submarine sailed over it, George saw a cloud of dolphins circling in the distance. The mountain top had been sheared off in a fashion that seemed too precise to be natural. It formed a plateau about 2 miles long and 1 mile wide. There were what appeared to be dark squares on this gray plateau. The submarine swooped down, and George saw that the squares were huge formations of men. In a moment, they were hovering over the army, like a helicopter observing troops on parade. George could clearly see the black uniforms, the green tanks with black and white crosses painted on them, the long, dark, up-jutting snouts of big guns. They stood there silent and immobile, thousands of feet below the surface of the lake.
That's the weapon the Illuminati plan to use to immanentize the eschaton?
Asked George.
Why don't we destroy them now?
Because they're under a protective biomystic field,
said Hagbard.
And we can't. I did want you to see them, though. When the electrical, astral, and orgonomic vibrations of the American Medical Association, amplified by the synergetic clusters of sound, image, and emotional energy of all these young people responding to the beat, bring that Nazi legion back to life, it will call for nothing less than the appearance on the field of battle of the goddess Eris herself to save the day.
Hagbard,
George protested disgustedly.
Are you telling me Eris is real? Really real and not just an allegory or symbol? I can't buy that any more than I can believe Jehovah or Cyrus is really real.
But Hagbard answered very solemnly.
When you're dealing with these forces of powers in a philosophic and scientific way, contemplating them from an armchair, that rationalistic approach is useful. It is quite profitable, then, to regard the gods and goddesses and demons as projections of the human mind or as unconscious aspects of ourselves. But every truth is a truth only for one place at one time. And that's a truth, as I said, for the armchair. When you're actually dealing with these figures, the only safe, pragmatic, and operational approach is to treat them as having a being, a will, and a purpose entirely apart from the humans who evoke them. If the sorcerer's apprentice had understood that, he wouldn't have gotten into so much trouble.
She'll be wearing red pajamas. She'll be wearing red pajamas. She'll be wearing red pajamas when she comes. Approaching the outskirts of the crowd, Fission Chips saw a group of musicians who were obviously English from their dress and hairstyle. Their name, he saw on the biggest drum, was Calculated Tedium, and the guitar player had a canteen strapped to his hip. He reminded 00005 of how thirsty he was, and he asked,
Pardon me, do you know where I could get some water or a soft drink?
Take a snort from me canteen,
the guitarist said affably, passing it over. He pointed to the west.
See that geodesic plywood dome there? It's a bleeding giant Kool-Aid station set up by the kabouters, and guaranteed to hold out even if the crowd doubles inside before this is over. I just filled the canteen from there, so it's fresh. You can get more over there any time you need it.
Thanks.
0005 said warmly, taking a long, cold, delightful swallow. He had a very low threshold for LSD. The world began to seem brighter, stranger, and more colorful within only a few minutes. The Joker was actually Rhoda Chief, the vocalist who sang with the Heads of Easter Island, and who had inspired much admiration in the younger generation, and much horror in the older, when she named her out-of-wedlock baby Jesus, Jehovah, Lucifer, Satan Chief. A former processine and Scientologist, currently going the Wicca route, the buxom Rhoda was renowned through showbiz for giving head like no chick alive, a reputation which often provoked certain Satanists on the Linda Lovelace for President committee to send very deadly vibes in her direction, all of which bounced off due to her Wicca shield. She was also possibly the greatest singer of her generation, and firmly believed that most human problems would be solved if the whole world could be turned on to acid. She had been preparing for the Ingolstadt festival for several months, buying only the top-quality tabs from the most reliable dealers, and she had crept into the geodesic Kool-Aid station only a few minutes earlier, dumping enough pure lysergic acid diethylamide to blow the minds of the population of a small country. Actually, the idea had been subtly planted in her consciousness by the leader of her Wakan, an astonishingly beautiful woman with flaming red hair and smoldering green eyes, who had once played a starring role in a black mass celebrated by Padre Pederastia at 2323 Lakeshore Drive. This woman called herself Lady Velcour and often made jokes about her memories of 18th century Bavaria, which Rhoda assumed were references to reincarnation. On April 10th, while Howard made his discovery in the ruins of Atlantis and Tlaloc grinned in Mexico DF, Tobias Knight, in his room at the Hotel Pancreston in Santa Isabel, concluded a broadcast to the American submarine in the Bight of Biafra.
The Ruskies and Chinks have completed their withdrawal, and General Isomo Puta is definitely friendly to our side, besides being popular with both the Booby and the Fang. My work is definitely finished. I'll await orders to return to Washington.
Roger. Over and out.
Frank Sullivan, capitalizing on his only real asset, was operating in Havana as a Cuban Superman, using the name Papa Piaba, when the Brotherhood spotted his resemblance to John Dillinger.
Gosh,
he said when they made the offer.
$5,000 just to take two ladies to a movie one night. And it's only a practical joke, you say?
It'll be a very funny joke,
High Capo Mocenigo promised him, and the Smithsonian acquired Mr. Sullivan's asset as one of their most interesting relics. We'll kill the old red rooster. Hagbard was accompanied by Joe Malik when he returned to the stateroom.
You go to the beer hall in Munich,
he was saying,
and steal any item, anything at all, as long as it's obviously old enough to have been there the night he tried the pushk. Then you rejoin the rest of us in Ingolstadt. Understood?
We'll kill the old red rooster. Lady Velcour, wearing a green peasant blouse and green hot pants, looked around the geodesic Kool-Aid dome. A man in a green turtleneck sweater and green slacks caught her eye, and she walked over to him asking,
Are you a turtle?
You bet your sweet ass I am.
He answered eagerly, and so she had failed to make contact, and owed this oaf a free drink also. But she smiled pleasantly and concealed her annoyance. We'll kill the old red rooster when she comes.
Robinson and Lehrman of the Homicide Department actually started the last phase of the operation. I was in New York to see Hassan I. Sabah X about a new phase of Laotian opium operation. I had just come from Chicago after staging that conversation with Waterhouse for Miss Cervix's benefit, and I decided to check with them for those little nuances that can't go into an official report. We met in Washington Square and found a bench far enough from the chestnuts to give us some privacy.
Muldoon is onto us,
Robinson told me right off. He was wearing a beard. I figured that meant he was currently in a Weather Underground group, since he was too old to pass for under 21 and get into Morituri. Are you sure? I asked. He made the usual reply.
Who's ever sure of anything in this business? But Barney is pure cop through and through,
he added.
And his instincts are like dowsing rods. Everybody on the force knows we've infiltrated them by now, anyway. They even make jokes about it. Who's the CIA man in your department? That kind of thing.
Muldoon is on to us, all right,
Lehrman agreed.
But he's not the one I worry about.
Who is? I brushed my walrus mustache nervously. Being the first pentuple agent in the history of espionage was starting to grind me down. I really wasn't sure which of my bosses should hear about this, although the CIA certainly had to be told, since for all I know Robinson and Lehrman might be reporting to them twice, having another contact as a fail-safe check on my own integrity.
The head of Homicide North,
Lehrman said.
An old geezer named Goodman. He's so damn smart, I sometimes wonder if he's a double agent for the Eye themselves. His mind jumps ahead of facts, just like an adeptus exemptus in the Order.
I looked up at the statue of Garibaldi, remembering the old NYU myth that he would pull his sword the rest of the way out of the scabbard if a virgin ever walked through Washington Park. Tell me more about this Goodman, I said.
Check out the pear on that chick,
a Superman said enthusiastically.
Watermelons,
a second Superman agreed enthusiastically.
And you know how us colored folk dig watermelons,
he added, licking his lips.
Skin,
the first cried.
Skin,
the second agreed. They slapped palms, and Clark Kent came out of his reverie. Having sampled the Kool-Aid a while earlier, he was beginning to float a little. Although not yet aware of what was happening, he just felt a rather unusual tug of memory from his days as an anthropologist, and was deeply concerned with a new insight about the relationship between the Black Virgin of Guadalupe, the Greek goddess Persephone, and his own sexual proclivities. And he came out of it with a start, looking at the woman whose breasts had inspired such reverence.
Son of a bitch,
he said piously, his mouth spreading in a grin.
Rebecca Goodman left the house at 3 p.m., hauling a shopping cart and walking past the garage. The nearest supermarket was a good 10 minutes on foot, and big enough to keep her busy for a half hour finding what she wanted and getting through one of those checkout lines. I slipped out of the car and walked right to the back of the house, perfectly secure from neighboring eyes in my Bell Telephone overalls. The kitchen door had an easy slip lock, and I didn't even need my keys. A playing card did the job, and I was in. My first thought was to head for the bedroom. The old man from Vienna was right, and that's where you'll find the real clues to a man's character. But one chair in the kitchen stopped me. The vibes were so strong that I closed my eyes and psychometered it according to the difficult third alco of the AA. It was Rebecca herself. She had sat there and thought about shooting heroin. It faded fast before I could read what had stopped her. The bedroom almost knocked me over when I found it. Who would have thought the old man had so much hot blood in him? I paraphrased, backing out. It was a profanation to read too much in there, and what I did scan was enough. As Miss Mao would say, this man was Dao Yin, Beta Prime in the terminology of the Eye. No wonder Robinson kept talking about his intuition. The living room had a statue of the mermaid of Copenhagen that stopped me. I read it and chuckled. Lord, the hang-ups we all have. One wall was a built-in bookcase, but Rebecca seemed to be the reader in the family. I started scanning experimentally and found Saul's vibes on a shelf of detective stories and a Scientific American anthology of mathematical and logical puzzles. The man had no concept of his own latent powers and thought only in terms of solving riddles. Sherlock Holmes without even the violin and the dope for relief from all that cortical activity. Everything else went into his marriage, that hothouse bedroom upstairs. No, there was a sketch pad on the coffee table. His, according to the aura. I flipped pages rapidly, all detailed, precise, perfectly naturalistic. Mostly faces, criminals he had dealt with professionally, all touched with a perception and compassion that he kept out of his work hours. Trees in Central Park, nudes of Rebecca, adoration in every line of the pencil. A surprising face of a black kid with some Harlem slum building in the background. Another touch of unexpected compassion. Then a switch. The first abstract. It was a Star of David, basically, but he had started adding energetic waves coming out of it, and the descending triangle was shaded. Somewhere in the back of his head he had been working out the symbolism and coming amazingly close to the truth. More faces of obvious criminal types. A scene in the Catskills with Rebecca reading a book under a tree. Something wrong. Gloom and fear in the shading. I closed my eyes and concentrated. The picture came in with a second woman. I opened my eyes, sweating. It was his first wife, and she had died of cancer. He was afraid of losing Rebecca, too, but she was young and healthy. Another man. He thought she might leave him for a younger man. Well, that was the key, then. I flipped a few more pages and saw a unicorn, some more of the unconscious work that went into that erotic Star of David. A quick scan of Rebecca's books, then. Mostly anthropology, mostly African. I took one off the shelf and held it. Eros again, thinly sublimated. The other part of the key. As Hassan I Sabah X once remarked to me, breathes there a white woman with soul so dead she never yearned for a black in her bed? I returned everything to its place carefully and headed for the back door. I stopped in the kitchen to read the chair again, since relapse is as much a part of the syndrome in heroin addiction as in black lung disease. This time I found what stopped her. If I say love, I'll sound sentimental, and if I say sex, I'll sound cynical. I'll call it pair bonding and sound scientific. Slipping back into my car, I checked the time elapsed. 17 minutes. It would have taken several hours to unearth as many facts by ordinary detection methods, and they would have been different, less significant facts. AA training has certainly made all my other jobs easier. There was only one remaining problem. I didn't want to kill anybody at this point, and a bombing would only get Muldoon in. Even having Malik disappear might only bring in missing persons. Then I remembered the dummies used by the clothier on the 18th floor, right above the confrontation office. Burn the dummy just right before setting the bomb, and it might work. I drove back toward Manhattan whistling, ho, 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 who's got the last laugh now?
The bomb went off at 2:30 a.m. 1 week later. Simon, leaving O'Hare Airport, where it was 1:30 a.m., decided he still had time to get to the friendly stranger and meet that cute lady cop who had so cleverly infiltrated the nameless anarchist horde. He could get her into bed easily enough, since female spies always expect men to reveal secrets when they're in the dreamy afterglow with their guard down. He would teach her some sexual yoga, he decided, and see what secrets she might slip. But he remembered the midnight conference at the UN building after the bomb was set and Malik's grim words.
If we're right about this, we might all be dead before Woodstock Europa opens next week.
Are you a turtle?
Lady Velcor asks again, approaching another man in green.
No,
he says.
I have no armor.
She smiles as she murmurs,
Blessed be.
And he replies,
Blessed be.
Doris Horace heard the voice behind her say,
And how's the Miskatonic Messalina?
And her heart leaped, not believing it, but when she turned, it was him, Stack.
Jesus,
one Superman said to another.
Does he personally know all the good-looking white chicks in the world?
The Senate and the people of Rome were still tussling with Attila and his Huns. But Hermes Speed King Trismegistus, drummer with the credibility gap, watched placidly from only a few feet away, seeing them as a very complicated, almost mathematical ballet. He was concerned only with determining whether they illustrated the eternal warfare of Set and Osiris, or the joining of atoms to make molecules. He knew he was on acid, but what the hell, that must have been the Kool-Aid, another of Tyle Eulenspiegel's merry pranks.